everybody. So today the topic is age, and in particular, how does age impact your ability to train, to continue building muscle and strength, and so on. And this is a topic that I think a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about, because you often have, the people on the one side that are just sort of going like age is just a number, and then you have the people on the other side who are going, like if you're over the age of 25, then, you're fucked. Like, you can't do anything. You might as well just admit that you're dying and get on with it or whatever. And the reality is that actually, it's obviously somewhere in the middle, but it is, I think, actually something that a lot of people would be surprised about, which is that while, yes, you do peak, relatively early on in life, and then you start to go downhill after that, you actually maintain, maybe not 100% of your peak potential, but very close to that for much longer than people tend to think. And it also has a lot to do with the fact that a lot of people don't understand the difference between, say, for example, different athletic qualities and how they all come together to create an athlete. First of all, the thing to understand is that there are different qualities, obviously, and the most important one, the one that is most confusing to people, is essentially reaction time, which is a crucial component of speed. So when you're talking about reaction times, when you're talking about agility, those qualities actually decay very quickly as you age. So basically, peak very early on in your life, and then they just go downhill, and there's not really too much you can do about it, and there's not really too much you can do to train that or to prevent too much of that drop off. And so this is why, for example, sports that include really, really high focus on precision and reaction times and that sort of thing are going to have very, very young athletes. And that's why you're going to see things like gymnastics tends to have very young athletes. That's why, obviously, esports has very young athletes. That is because, obviously, esports are sports, and the reason why you don't see a lot of older folks doing them, even though they are obviously perfectly capable of smashing away at a keyboard, is simply because their reaction times have gone down significantly since they were teenagers, 20 years old, whatever. That's the big thing, because that reaction time factor plays into many, many sports. Most field sports involve some amount of reaction time, running, sprinting, trying to be as fast as possible, trying to move a ball around a field, etc. And so that is why many athletes in those particular kinds of sports, again, tend to peak relatively early on, because they are so reliant on those, fast twitch, high reaction type skills. The thing is that a lot of those other underlying qualities, so things like your ability to build strength, your ability to build muscle mass, your ability to build endurance, and so on, those are all factors that actually are not nearly as impacted by age and can last a lot longer. And so that means that sports which are not so highly dependent on those fast twitch abilities, you can actually be an athlete who is extremely competitive much later on in life. So in particular, for example, you take something like weightlifting. Olympic weightlifting is obviously a sport that involves a lot of strength, a lot of muscle mass, but it also involves a lot of speed. It also involves a lot of reactivity, because you have to be able to move the weight very quickly and very explosively so that you can then get under it and then complete the lift. Compare that to something like powerlifting. Powerlifting, you could be as slow as you want. It doesn't matter. It's all about that pure raw strength. And so because it is a lot more about that pure raw strength, you can have powerlifters who are much older, peak much older, and are competitive much older. There are, in fact, world records who are set by, basically people who are in their 50s, close to their 60s, that sort of thing. Not just world records within their age class, but within the open, all lifters. That's in part because, again, strength as a quality just decays a lot more slowly. So the reality is that when it comes to strength, when it comes to muscle mass, when it comes to endurance, you can have these people where, basically they might peak somewhere around 30, maybe a little bit higher than that. And then, okay, maybe by the time they're 35, they've gone down, say, 2%, 3% compared to their peak, but they've also continued training, and they've built up some more strength, some more muscle mass during that time, so that may offset it or completely overwrite it. And it may seem like, yes, okay, I'm struggling, I'm having to work harder to get further gains at this point, but I'm not actually going downhill yet. And that can continue, again, you lose a few more percentage points here and there, And you can really maintain, I would say, 90-95% of your strength and your muscle mass even into, say, your 40s, potentially even into your 50s. This is why we also have things like bodybuilders who are incredibly jacked despite being in their 50s. That's a thing that a lot of people don't know about. It has happened a lot in the past. And we have quite a lot of examples of just people who are surprisingly old for just how jacked and how strong they are. In fact, when I was first starting out, as a personal trainer, as a powerlifter, when I was really getting serious about going to the gym, which was, that was 10, 12 years ago now, I was going to the gym. I could squat, say, 300, 350 at the time, and I was really proud of that, and I was like 22 years old, and I was like, this is so exciting. And at the time, I was like the strongest person I knew in my gym, obviously, because I was just like, going to like a YMCA. Like nobody else in there could lift anywhere near as much weight as I could. And then in comes this old guy who's like in his 60s. He can squat like 450, close to 500 easy, and he's just like repping it out, and he's just like making me look, like incredibly weak in comparison. And he was a total badass. At one point, he actually like disappeared from the gym for a few months. And then he came back, and I was like, oh, what happened? I haven't seen you in a while. And he was like, oh, yeah, I had to get a surgery. And I'm like, okay, like what kind of surgery do you have to get? And he goes, oh, bowel cancer. They just had to take it all out. And then I was supposed to take some time off, and then I didn't. So I'm back already. And I was like, Christ, this old man is incredible. You can have those people like that who are very strong into relatively late in life, simply because they keep training. And that's another factor that a lot of people don't consider. So, basically the reality is that obviously after about 25 to 30, you're going to peak in terms of your physical abilities, and you are going to start going downhill very slowly. Again, you might be training and then overshooting that, completely overcoming that for quite a while. And you can continue to fight that well into, again, like your 40s, your 50s. You can continue to get stronger and peak, much later on in life. There is also the factor that essentially, as you are training is obviously good for you. That helps you to retain the muscle mass that you have. That helps to prevent the amount that you're going downhill. So when you have somebody who is training pretty significantly, they are, training really well, and they're doing so, just very consistently, they might, basically they might lose, say 1% a year versus somebody who's not training at all and they lose, 2, 3, 4, 5% a year. It's, it comes down a lot to basically just how active you are. And obviously you want to keep training for that reason. This is also why, basically, typically it takes somebody about 5 years of serious training, actually knowing what they're doing and so on, to really peak in terms of kind of like their athletic potential. And so most people are going to peak relatively early if they find their sport relatively early. So you get into a sport at the age of, say, 15, then you're going to reach, basically the vast majority of your potential by, say, the age of 20, provided that you're training well and so on. And so then you might eventually just kind of get bored of it and decide to quit and move on relatively early on in life. That's another thing that happens. There's a lot of stories of like bodybuilders who quit early on in life, moved on to doing other things. It happens. It is relatively a young person's game. But, at the same time, you could do that later on in life, right? Like you could do that at, 30, 35. And yes, you might peak around the age of 40. That might be what it is for you, even though, yes, you are, a few percentage points down from where you would have been if you had gotten into this sport much earlier on in life. You're still, awesome, getting the most out of your genetics, getting the most out of your training at the age of 40. You could still get into training much, much later in life. You could still get into training at 45, 50, 55, 60. It is never too late to start training because you can still get the vast majority of your genetic potential despite the fact that time has been working against you little by little over time. You do have to take quite a few things into consideration starting training. The older you are, you're more likely you are to have things like injuries that you need to work around, movements that you can't do, issues with your mobility, and so on. So you can't just jump into the exact same kind of training that you would do if you were 15, if you were 20. I have done a lot of stupid things where I got myself hurt trying to train like I was still 15 or 20. You can do most of what you could do. Like you're still doing the same kind of training, you're still training the same kinds of movements, you're still training, the same kinds of intensities, you're still seeing roughly the same relative rates of progress. It's just that you are starting out at a different place and you have to be aware of that and you have to be aware of how to work around that, which may be a little bit tougher, right? Like if you're somebody who's starting out at 45, you don't know anything about training, you have more aches and pains, more things that could go wrong, more things that could hurt you compared to getting started at 15 and maybe you don't know what the hell you're doing, but it's fine because, even though you do a lot of things that could have potentially injured you, you can get away with it because you're a kid, right? So when you are older, you do have to approach things a little bit more cautiously. You do have to be a little bit more careful. Yes, your recovery times might be a little more delayed. You might have to be a little bit more cautious in terms of overall volume and those sorts of things. But you can still roughly train relatively the same way that you could when you were younger. And you can still see roughly the same results that you could get when you were younger. And of course, it's always a good thing to keep training. One of the biggest benefits that you get out of training as you get older is simply that, again, you're helping to maintain the amount of muscle mass, the amount of strength that you have, the amount of function that you have, so that as you get older, you don't then just turn into a puddle of goo and, hurt yourself just trying to bend over to, pick up a piece of trash or something. The most important thing about training in the long run is not obviously being jacked and strong and showing off when you're a kid. That's, again, a young man's game. But when you're older, the focus of your training is more like, hey, how can I preserve this meat husk? How can I make this meat husk last as long as possible? At that point, actually, the value in that is not, seeing progress. It's actually just keeping things the same. So I always tell people, you could train every single day for the rest of your life. If you could maintain the same level of strength, the same level of muscle mass that you have now at the age of, say, 20, 30, you can maintain that until you're 60, 70, 80. You're the most jacked guy in the nursing home. Maybe you weren't even in the nursing home. Maybe you're fully functional at the age of 80, just running around. You are a monster at that point. You're a machine. You've beaten, you've won the game. That's all there is to it. Maybe don't be too concerned as you get older if you're not seeing, progress after a certain point. Again, most people can still continue to progress, can still see progress pretty consistently, provided their training is good, they're not overdoing it. But, again, at a certain point, you hit the age of 50, you hit the age of 60, hit the age of 70, okay, stop worrying so much about how you look, stop worrying so much about how strong you are, and so on, and start focusing more on, just maintaining what you got, feeling good, moving good, all that good stuff. So that is all for this week's video. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, don't hesitate to like, comment, subscribe, smash that notification bell, tell all your friends about this video, all the lovely things that you do when you like a video. I will see you all next week. Have a good one.